ovary. In a human, an ovary, when you're born, the ovary contains a couple million follicles that are stuck in meiosis. Okay, remember from bio, meiosis is the cell division that gives us gametes. And in a male, meiosis is just kind of going on all the time to make sperm. In a female, the process of gametogenesis, oogenesis to produce an egg, starts when she's an embryo, as a fetus. And then it stops. And it stops in prophase 1, if that means anything to you. It's right at the first part of meiosis, it just stops. And then it doesn't continue until puberty, until sexual maturity. And in response to fluctuations in LH, FSH, and estrogen, on average, one of these follicles will be allowed to complete the process and produce a single egg. Okay? The rest of them are stuck. They die out at a pretty high rate, actually. By the time a woman is, let's say when a woman's born, she may have 1 to 2 million of these. By the time she's sexually mature, there may be 400 to 500,000 of them. So they've died out or been removed by the body there. By the time she's 30, there might be a few thousand. By the time she's 40, there might be a few hundred. By the time she's 50, there might be 5. By the time she's 55, there aren't any left. So if there aren't any of these potential gametes left, she can't ovulate, right? And that marks the menopause, right, or the post-reproductive part of the female life. Also, beyond the scope of what I really want to get into here, but the longer that the egg stays stuck in development, the more likely there can be errors when it is allowed to develop. Right? So there is a relationship, a correlation between maternal age and genetic birth defects. Right? Because that, again, is kind of related to that. In fact, certainly if you look at Down syndrome, there is a very high correlation between maternal age and Down syndrome. But apart from that, if things are working and ovulating in response to these different conditions, what we would see is over the course of a cycle, a reproductive cycle, and the average reproductive cycle for a female is 28 days. Now you have to realize that that's an average. Not every single female every single month has a 28-day cycle. Some women have very predictable cycles, and they could be 32 days, they could be 24 days, or whatever. But on average, it's 28. And also, a female can be variable from month to month. It just depends, right? I mean, there's all that kind of variability out there. But on average, it's 28 days. And we would start on day 1, if you will, okay, with this primary follicle. And over the course of a month, it would mature like this. You notice how the egg is staying about the same. It's this thing in the middle. But the follicle itself is getting larger. And at about mid-cycle here, so this is day 1, this would be at about day 14, pressure builds up so large in this antrum here that the follicle actually explodes off the surface of the ovary. And the egg is just blasted out off the surface. Now hopefully these fimbriae are sitting here sweeping across and suck it in. And then that would be ovulation. Then notice what happens to the old follicle. There's no egg anymore. These cells that are in here, they're called granulosa cells that are in here, actually become endocrine cells here. And these endocrine cells here form this thing. It's called a yellow body, corpus luteum, and it's an endocrine structure. And what it produces is progesterone. And it will produce progesterone, but over time it'll get smaller and smaller and smaller. And at about day 28, so back to day 1, it's gone. And we're ready to do it again. Okay. Now obviously, if this thing resulted in a pregnancy, what do we want to stop? We want to stop this. Right? We want to say, okay, don't stop right there. And that's going to be under hormonal control. And what stops that actually is progesterone, a really increase in progesterone. And I'll show you that in just a second. Now, this is the ovarian cycle, and this is under hormonal control. Actually what happens, I'll show you a picture in a second, but what happens over the course of the 28-day cycle, estrogen levels start to get really high. And when estrogen levels reach a critical peak, the body releases FSH and LH in really high amounts. LH especially causes the production of a very, let's see if we can figure this one out, a very hyperosmotic fluid right here. Jillian. Because this is hyperosmotic, what's water going to want to do? Rush inside. So now we got this really hyperosmotic fluid sucking in a bunch of water. What's going to happen to the pressure? Builds up, right? It's like a water balloon bursting. And then that egg just gets blasted out. That happens at about day 14, and that is directly in response to that LH surge. So what is the hormone that triggers ovulation, if you will? LH. If LH levels don't reach that critical high peak, this never becomes hyperosmotic, then this never happens. Okay with that? We did ovulation at day 14, and then now this old follicle here becomes a corpus luteum, and it starts making progesterone. And as long as it's healthy, it'll make progesterone. But it has a lifespan.